The breaking point. A wedding dress and a cage. Sarah adjusted the lace on her wedding dress, her fingers trembling as she looked at her reflection in the grand mirror of the penthouse suite. The dress was a masterpiece, hand-stitched silk imported from Italy, pearls delicately woven into the bodice, and a train so long it required 2 attendants. The image was flawless, and yet as she stared at herself, all she saw was a prisoner. "You'll be perfect," Marcus had said earlier, running his fingers down her arm as if she were one of his prized possessions. "My mother expects perfection." Sarah swallowed the lump in her throat. The Zhang family was one of the wealthiest business dynasties in the country, their influence stretching across continents. And she, once a simple girl with dreams of building her own success, had been chosen to stand beside Marcus Zhang, the crown prince of an empire. Chosen, not loved. The difference had never been more suffocating. Outside, the orchestra played a soft melody as guests sipped champagne from crystal flutes. Everything had been meticulously arranged. Rare orchids flown in from Thailand, caviar platters hand-selected by a Michelin-starred chef, and security so tight it made the national treasury look accessible. Sarah turned away from the mirror, her heartbeat hammering against her ribcage. She reached for her phone, desperate for an anchor. But before she could unlock it, the door swung open. Marcus's mother stood there, the sharp lines of her silk gown a mirror of her demeanor. "It's time," she said, her tone clipped, her eyes scanning Sarah with the cold efficiency of an appraising jeweler. "Make sure you smile." The words carried an edge, a warning. Sarah nodded and forced her lips into a practiced curve. She wasn't a bride today. She was an accessory, the beginning of the end. As Sarah walked down the aisle, every step felt heavier than the last. The guests turned, their eyes filled with admiration for the perfect spectacle before them. But Sarah's gaze locked onto one man standing near the front. Her father, a factory worker who had spent his entire life ensuring she had every opportunity, who had supported her dreams long before Marcus had ever stepped into the picture. But today, his eyes weren't filled with pride. They were filled with sorrow. She barely heard the vows. Marcus's voice was smooth, charming, filled with the right amount of affection to make the camera swoon. And when it was her turn, Sarah's hands trembled as she placed the ring on his finger. Marcus's grip tightened. Firm, commanding, possessive. "Smile," he whispered, his voice a silk-covered blade. And so she did. The first lie of many. A crumbling foundation. The first year of marriage had been a well-rehearsed performance. Sarah played the role of the devoted wife, attending charity galas, posing for magazine covers, and ensuring the public saw the image of a flawless union. Behind closed doors, she was suffocating. Marcus wasn't abusive, not in the way that left visible scars. His cruelty was measured, his control absolute. He dictated what she wore, where she went, who she spoke to. Any deviation from his expectations was met with a quiet, chilling disappointment. "I need a wife who understands the importance of image," he would say, his voice carrying the weight of unspoken threats. Sarah had tried. God, she had tried. But the walls were closing in. Then came the doctor's appointment. The final straw. "You're saying I can't have children." Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper, her fingers clenching the edges of the examination table. Dr. Patterson's face softened. "Natural conception will be extremely difficult, if not impossible. There are options: adoption, surrogacy." Sarah never heard the rest. Marcus's reaction had been immediate. Cold fury, silent dinners, and finally, the words that shattered whatever remained between them. "The Zhang bloodline does not accept substitutes." That night, Sarah sat alone in their penthouse, staring at her reflection once again. But this time, she saw something different. Not a prisoner. A survivor. A woman who needed to escape. A plan in motion. It took her 3 months to carefully unravel herself from Marcus's world. She hired the best lawyer she could find. funneled every ounce of energy into securing a clean break, and walked away with nothing but her name. No money, no alimony, no connections. She didn't care. Sarah Chun had built her own dreams once. She would do it again. As she signed the final divorce papers, Marcus barely glanced up. His focus was on the documents, on the numbers, on securing his empire from any weakness. And then, just as she turned to leave, he spoke. "You'll regret this," he murmured, not with anger, but with certainty. "You had everything, Sarah. You think you can make it without me, without my name." She met his gaze, steady and unwavering. "Watch me." And with that, she walked out of his world. Forever. Rising from the ashes. The first year was brutal. No connections meant no shortcuts. Sarah took consulting jobs, scraped together savings, and poured everything she had into rebuilding her career. And along the way, she found something unexpected. A family. 4 children, siblings abandoned by the system, waiting for someone to believe in them. Michael, the eldest at 12, with eyes too wise for his age. Lucas, the curious scientist, always questioning the world. Emma, the dancer who twirled through life with quiet grace. And Sophie, the youngest, whose laughter reminded Sarah of everything good in the world. They had been left behind. So had she. And together, they created something stronger than blood. Something real. 5 years later, Sarah Chun was no longer the woman who had walked down the aisle in a dress that felt like a cage. She was the CEO of a billion-dollar company. She was a mother to 4 incredible children. She was free. But freedom came with its own battles. Because one day, as she sat in her glass-walled office, overlooking the skyline of a city she had conquered, her assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Miss Chun, there's a news conference on Channel 4. You may want to see this." Sarah picked up the remote, turning on the screen. And there he was. Marcus Jiang, flanked by cameras, a model half his age draped on his arm, his smirk as sharp as ever. "In business, as in life," he declared, "there is no room for weakness. Some of us build empires. Others, well, some people just weren't made for greatness." Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from Michael. "Mom, did you see the news? Are you okay?" She looked at her children's photo on her desk. Her empire wasn't built on glass towers and press conferences. It was built on love. And it was unbreakable. Sarah smiled, texting back. "I'm fine, sweetheart. How about ice cream after school?" Because real success wasn't proving Marcus wrong. It was never needing to. But fate had other plans. And soon, Marcus Jiang would learn a lesson that no amount of wealth could shield him from. Because Sarah Chun was done hiding, and she was about to remind the world exactly who she was. The invitation and the challenge. A ghost from the past. Sarah sat at her desk, sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of her office. The city stretched before her like a kingdom she had built with her own hands. 5 years. 5 years since she had walked away from Marcus Jiang, and everything that came with him. She glanced at the framed photo beside her laptop. A candid moment at the beach, Michael laughing as he tried to chase Sophie, Lucas holding up a seashell, and Emma mid-spin in one of her endless dance twirls. Her real empire. Then, her intercom crackled to life. "Miss Chun, you have an urgent delivery," her assistant Jenny said hesitantly. "It's an invitation." Sarah frowned. An invitation to what? Jenny's voice wavered. Marcus Jiang's wedding. Silence. Sarah's fingers tightened around her pen, her grip so tight her knuckles turned white. "Send it in," she said calmly. Jenny appeared moments later, a sleek black envelope in her hands. Sarah took it without a word. The weight of it felt heavier than paper should. Inside, gold-foiled lettering announced the grand event. "Marcus Jiang and Victoria Leong request the honor of your presence at their wedding. A union of legacy and success." Sarah's lips pressed into a thin line. It wasn't just a wedding. It was a statement. A declaration. Marcus's way of saying, "Look at what I built. Look at what you lost." And then her eyes caught something else. A small handwritten note tucked inside. "I hope you'll attend, Sarah. It's important to show the world how we've all moved forward. Bring a +1. Someone suitable." Marcus's arrogance practically dripped off the ink. Sarah let out a slow breath. This wasn't just an invitation. It was a challenge. A family council. That night, Sarah gathered her children in the living room. Michael, now 14, sat cross-legged on the floor, scrolling through his tablet. Lucas, 12, was assembling a new robotics project on the coffee table. Emma, 10, twirled a strand of her hair around her finger, and Sophie, 6, clutched her favorite stuffed elephant, Mr. Snuggles. "Mom, you're making that face again," Michael said, not even looking up. Sarah raised an eyebrow. "What face?" "The one where you're thinking about something big, but don't want to say it yet," Lucas added, eyes sharp as ever. Emma sat up straighter. "Did something bad happen?" Sarah sighed, holding up the invitation. Silence. Then Michael whistled. "Dan." "Language," Sarah chided. "But seriously," he said, setting his tablet down. "Why would he invite you?" "I thought he wanted to pretend you didn't exist." "He does," Sarah said, "which is exactly why he invited me." Lucas frowned. "I don't get it." Michael turned to his younger brother. "It's about power. He's not just inviting Mom. He's showing off. He wants the world to see how much better he thinks his life is now." Emma wrinkled her nose. "That's so mean." "It is," Sarah admitted. "But the question is, what do we do about it?" Sophie, who had been quiet the entire time, suddenly piped up. "We go." Everyone turned to her. Sophie hugged Mr. Snuggles close. "We go and we show him he's wrong." Lucas scratched his head. "I don't know, Sophie. It might be really awkward." "But we're a family," she insisted, her little brows furrowing. "A real family. And real families don't hide." Sarah blinked. Of all the responses she had anticipated, this wasn't one of them. But as she looked at Sophie's determined face, at Michael's calculating expression, at Lucas's thoughtful frown, and Emma's growing excitement, she realized something. Marcus wanted her to feel small. And maybe 5 years ago, she would have. But not anymore. Operation Phoenix. The next morning, Sarah walked into her office, where Jenny was already waiting with a knowing look. "You're going, aren't you?" Sarah smirked. "Of course." Jenny sighed. "I'll start making calls." By noon, her team had assembled, including her close friend and PR strategist, Lillian Park. Lillian glanced over the invitation, her sharp eyes narrowing. "This isn't just a wedding, Sarah," she said. "This is a PR move. You showing up. That's going to be a headline." "I know," Sarah said, "which is why we're going to control the narrative." Lillian grinned. "I love a good power move. What's the plan?" Sarah placed both hands on her desk. "We don't just attend. We arrive. And we do it with purpose." She turned to the large whiteboard on the wall, picking up a marker. At the top, she wrote 2 words. Operation Phoenix. "First," she said, underlining the name, "Marcus expects me to show up alone, or with some businessman who fits his definition of suitable. Are you bringing someone?" Lillian asked. Sarah smiled. "Better. I'm bringing my children." Jenny's eyes widened. "All 4. All 4. There was a beat of silence, and then Lillian let out a low whistle. "Dan, that's bold." "Marcus thinks family is about blood and legacy," Sarah said. "We're going to show him what real family looks like." She turned back to the board, writing 3 more points. 1. Make an entrance. 2. Control the story. 3. Show them we've already won. Jenny tilted her head. "What about outfits?" Sarah smiled. "We're going to wear what makes us us, not what fits into Marcus's world." Lillian leaned back, nodding. "This isn't just about showing up. This is about reminding Marcus, and everyone else, that you're not some tragic ex-wife. You're Sarah Chun. Dan right, Sarah said. And for the first time in years, she felt excited. The headlines begin. 3 days later, the plan was in motion. Emma had selected a dress that made her feel like a princess. Soft yellow, flowy, comfortable. Lucas had opted for a sharp but relaxed button-up with a science-themed tie. Michael settled on a fitted blazer, and Sophie had proudly announced that Mr. Snuggles would be coming along. Sarah, for her part, had received an unexpected package, a gift from her estranged sister, May. Inside was a stunning cheongsam, deep crimson with golden phoenix embroidery. A note was attached. I was wrong. You were always stronger than I realized. Wear this and show them. Sarah ran her fingers over the fabric. This wasn't just a dress. It was armor. Meanwhile, Michael had been tracking the online buzz. Mom, look at this, he said, pulling up an article. Marcus Jang's lavish wedding. Will the ex-wife attend? A tale of two legacies, the Jangs versus the Chuns. Sarah let out a breath. The world was watching, and she was ready. The final countdown. The night before the wedding, the family gathered around the kitchen table. Are we really ready for this? Lucas asked. Sarah looked at each of them. We don't have to do this. Michael shook his head. We do, not for Marcus. For us. Emma nodded. We need to show people what real love looks like. Sophie grinned. And we need to dance. Sarah laughed. They had already won. Tomorrow, the world would see it too. The grand arrival. The calm before the storm. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear, but Sarah felt the tension brewing beneath the surface. She sat on the edge of her bed, holding the invitation one last time, rereading Marcus's handwritten note. Bring a +1. Someone suitable. She smirked. Oh, she was bringing more than just a +1. Downstairs, the house was already alive with excitement. Lucas was ironing his tie, muttering about how unnecessary it was, while Emma practiced smiling in the mirror. Michael had been glued to his laptop all morning, monitoring social media for any last-minute shifts in the news cycle. Sophie, still in her pajamas, was attempting to feed Mr. Snuggles a spoonful of cereal. Sarah walked down the stairs and cleared her throat. All right, team. We have a game plan. Are we ready? 4 pairs of eyes turned toward her, and 4 nods followed. Michael, what's the latest? She asked. Michael swiveled his laptop toward her. The media is buzzing. Most outlets are framing it as a dramatic reunion between you and Marcus, he said, rolling his eyes. They think you're going to come alone, looking heartbroken, while he parades Victoria around like a trophy. Lucas snorted. Oh, they're in for a surprise. Sarah smiled. Yes, they are, which means we execute our plan flawlessly. She turned toward Emma. And our outfits. Emma clapped her hands excitedly. Perfect. No boring corporate dresses. No stiff suits. Just us. Sarah nodded approvingly. That's exactly what I want. We show up as ourselves. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders. This wasn't just about facing Marcus. This was about showing the world who she had become. And she wasn't afraid anymore. Dressed for battle. By the time they were all dressed, even Jenny, her assistant, was in tears. You look incredible, Jenny whispered, hand on her heart. Like a warrior queen. Sarah looked at herself in the mirror. The crimson cheongsam hugged her frame perfectly, its golden phoenix embroidery glowing under the morning light. The high collar and elegant cut exuded power, while the deep red spoke of resilience. Around her neck, she wore the jade pendant her mother had given her years ago, a symbol of her roots and strength. Michael stood beside her in a fitted navy blazer, his dark eyes sharp with determination. Lucas adjusted his science-themed tie, looking both nervous and excited. Emma twirled in her flowing yellow dress, radiating confidence, while Sophie, in her pink and white ensemble, clutched Mr. Snuggles with unwavering pride. Sarah turned to them. her heart swelling. "You're the best thing that's ever happened to me," she whispered. Michael smirked. "We know." Sarah laughed, shaking her head. "Let's go remind the world of that, shall we?" Making an entrance. When they arrived at the Jang estate, the scene was exactly what Sarah had expected. Opulent, grand, calculated. Luxury cars lined the driveway. Guests in designer gowns and tailored suits milled about under twinkling chandeliers, and a press section had been strategically placed by the entrance. Of course, Marcus wanted her arrival captured. He wanted the world to see her as the scorned ex-wife, standing in the shadow of his perfect new life. Except he had made one fatal miscalculation. Sarah never played by his rules. The moment she stepped out of the car, there was an audible shift in the crowd. Conversations halted. Heads turned. Camera flashes erupted like fireworks. Sarah Chun had arrived. And she wasn't alone. She held her head high as she walked, her children surrounding her like an impenetrable shield. Michael strode beside her, tall and composed, exuding quiet confidence. Lucas adjusted his glasses with a grin. Emma waved at the cameras like she was on a red carpet. And Sophie, sweet, innocent Sophie, walked with Mr. Snuggles proudly tucked under her arm. The whispers started immediately. "Wait, those are her kids. I thought she couldn't have children." Marcus said. Sarah smiled to herself. "Let them talk." The clash of worlds. "Miss Chun," a voice called from ahead. Sarah recognized it instantly. Marcus's mother. Madame Jang approached, her expression unreadable. She looked Sarah up and down, her eyes lingering on the cheongsam, the jade pendant. And then, the children. "Sarah," she said smoothly, though there was a tightness to her tone. "You look, well." Sarah smiled. "I do, don't I?" Madame Jang's gaze flickered toward the children. "I see you've expanded your family." "I have," Sarah replied evenly. "Michael, Lucas, Emma, Sophie, these are my children." Madame Jang's lips pressed into a thin line. "How unexpected." "Life is full of surprises," Sarah said, tilting her head. "Isn't it?" The older woman's gaze sharpened, but before she could reply, another voice cut in. "Sarah." Marcus. He stood a few feet away, his expression frozen in something between shock and disbelief. For the first time in years, Sarah looked at him and felt nothing. No pain, no regret, no longing, just clarity. Marcus's eyes darted to the children, his face unreadable. "So, these are yours?" "Yes," Sarah said, holding her ground. "They are mine." A tense silence stretched between them. Marcus opened his mouth, but before he could say anything, Sophie stepped forward. "Hi," she said, completely unfazed. "Do you want to hold Mr. Snuggles?" A few guests stifled chuckles. Marcus blinked. No, thank you." Sophie shrugged. "Suit yourself. He's really good at making people feel better." Lucas snickered, and Michael grinned. Sarah crossed her arms. "Well, Marcus, are you going to introduce me to your fiancé?" Marcus stiffened. Then, as if summoned, Victoria Leong appeared beside him. She was breathtakingly beautiful, tall, poised, the perfect picture of an elite businessman's wife-to-be. Sarah extended a hand. "Victoria, congratulations." Victoria hesitated only a fraction of a second before shaking Sarah's hand. "Thank you," Victoria said, her voice smooth. "We're so glad you could make it." Sarah smiled, though she noticed something in Victoria's eyes. Hesitation. Uncertainty. Interesting. "Of course," Sarah said. "It's important to show the world how we've all moved forward." Marcus flinched ever so slightly. And in that moment, Sarah knew. He had expected her to come looking defeated. Instead, she had arrived victorious. And the night was only beginning. A battle of legacies. The power play begins. The reception hall was a masterpiece of extravagance. Gold chandeliers, cascading flower arrangements, a string quartet playing soft, classical melodies. The guests, a who's who of the business elite, were already buzzing with curiosity. Sarah could feel their eyes on her. The ex-wife, the one Marcus had left behind. Except she hadn't been left behind at all. She had walked away. And now, standing in the heart of Marcus's empire, surrounded by the family she had built, she felt an unshakable certainty. She had already won. "Miss Chun," a smooth voice interrupted her thoughts. Sarah turned to see none other than Mr. Leong, Victoria's father and one of Marcus's biggest business rivals. He was a towering man, his presence commanding even in a room full of power players. "I must admit," Mr. Leong said, swirling his glass of whiskey, "I was surprised to see you here tonight." Sarah smiled. "And yet, I was invited." "Yes, well," Mr. Leong chuckled, "I assume you know why." His gaze flickered toward Marcus and Victoria, who were now greeting guests. "Marcus has a reputation to maintain. And you, my dear, are a loose thread in his carefully woven tapestry." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Is that so?" Mr. Leong leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "He expected you to decline, or at the very least, to arrive alone, looking bitter and unfinished." He took a slow sip of his drink. "Instead, you walk in like a queen, with a family that." He glanced at her children. "No one saw coming." Sarah smirked. "Marcus always underestimated me." "He still does," Mr. Leong murmured. Sarah's eyes flicked across the room, where Marcus stood, exuding his usual charm, but there was a tension in his shoulders. His smile was too forced, his glances toward Sarah too frequent. Yes, he was rattled. Good. But Sarah knew this wasn't just about her. Marcus didn't make personal moves. Everything he did was calculated. If he had invited her, it wasn't just to gloat. He had a bigger play in mind. And she was about to find out what it was. The announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen." The voice of the event's host rang out, calling for attention. The murmur of conversation hushed as the guests turned toward the grand stage. Marcus and Victoria stood at the front, bathed in golden light, the image of perfection. Sarah crossed her arms. "Here we go." Marcus smiled his signature, camera-ready grin. "First, I want to thank you all for being here tonight. It means the world to Victoria and me to share this special moment with our closest friends, family, and esteemed colleagues." Polite applause. Victoria's smile was flawless, but Sarah didn't miss the way her fingers curled slightly against her champagne flute. "We believe in legacy," Marcus continued, "in building something lasting. And that is why Victoria and I are pleased to share some exciting news with you all tonight." He turned toward Victoria, who gave him a perfectly rehearsed, adoring look. Sarah already knew what was coming. "We're expecting our first child." Gasps filled the room. Then came the applause, louder, more enthusiastic this time. Marcus had planned this moment perfectly. Sarah felt the weight of countless eyes turning toward her, waiting for a reaction. A flicker of pain, a forced smile, a tightening of her expression. Sarah gave them nothing. Instead, she raised her glass with a polite, composed smile. "Congratulations," she said, her voice carrying through the quiet. "That's wonderful news." Victoria's smile twitched, just for a second. Marcus's gaze locked onto hers, searching. But Sarah had spent years playing this game, and she played it better than anyone. The trap revealed. After the announcement, the guests broke into excited chatter, offering congratulations. Sarah turned away, heading toward the bar, needing a moment to process. Not because she was hurt. She had made peace with her past long ago. But because she knew this announcement wasn't just about Victoria and Marcus's future child. This was about perception. Marcus had orchestrated a perfect contrast. Sarah, the woman who failed to give him an heir. Victoria, the woman who succeeded. This wasn't a wedding. It was a staged press conference, and she was supposed to play the part of the pitiful ex-wife. She wouldn't give him that satisfaction. Need a drink? A voice interrupted. Sarah turned to see Victoria standing beside her. That was unexpected. Champagne, Victoria offered, holding out a flute. Sarah took it, studying Victoria's face. Up close, she could see it, the slight tightness around her eyes, the way her smile didn't quite reach them. You don't have to pretend with me, Sarah said quietly. Victoria stilled. What do you mean? Sarah took a sip of champagne. You don't look thrilled to be Marcus's perfect bride. Victoria let out a soft laugh. Well, I suppose no one is thrilled to be part of a business arrangement. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Victoria sighed, swirling her champagne. You think I don't know why I'm here? Why Marcus chose me? She let out a small, hollow chuckle. My father's company is his direct competitor. Marrying me means merging our families. It's not about love. It's about power. Sarah already knew this, but hearing Victoria say it confirmed something important. Victoria wasn't the enemy. She was another pawn in Marcus's game. And Sarah didn't play by his rules. She rewrote them. I'm going to give you some advice, Sarah said, setting down her drink. Marcus doesn't love anyone as much as he loves his own image. Victoria's grip tightened on her glass. Be careful, Sarah continued, because when he no longer needs you, he'll treat you exactly the way he treated me. Victoria met her gaze. Something flickered in her eyes, something uncertain. And in that moment, Sarah knew. Victoria wasn't as secure in this marriage as Marcus wanted the world to believe. And that was dangerous for Marcus. Marcus makes his move. Just then, Marcus appeared, slipping an arm around Victoria's waist. Enjoying the party? He asked, his voice smooth. Sarah smiled. Immensely. Marcus's eyes darkened slightly. It's good to see you. Moving forward. Sarah sipped her champagne. Oh, I moved forward a long time ago, Marcus. You were just too busy looking at your own reflection to notice. Marcus's smile faltered. Just for a second. Got you. He leaned in slightly. You may have rebuilt your life, Sarah, but don't forget, I still hold the real power. Sarah laughed softly, shaking her head. Oh, Marcus, she said, placing a hand on his arm. You still don't get it, do you? His jaw tightened. Sarah leaned in just enough for only him to hear. The difference between you and me, she whispered, is that your power is built on illusion. She gestured to her children, chatting with business elites, effortlessly winning them over. Mine is built on something real. And as Marcus stood there, watching as Sarah walked away, his carefully controlled world beginning to crack. She knew. The real fight was only just beginning. Cracks in the empire. An unraveling mask. Marcus stood frozen as Sarah walked away, her confidence leaving a ripple effect through the crowd. This wasn't how the night was supposed to go. He had planned everything. Her presence, her reaction, the way the media would capture her sitting in the shadows of his newfound success. Instead, Sarah was the one people were talking about. He clenched his jaw as he turned to Victoria, who was still watching Sarah's retreating figure with an unreadable expression. Don't let her get in your head, he muttered, his fingers tightening around her waist. Victoria's lips twitched into a polite smile, but Marcus noticed the way her body stiffened beneath his touch. I'll be back, she said softly, slipping from his grip. He didn't stop her. Instead, he turned toward the nearest group of guests, forcing his usual charming smirk. Forgive the interruption, he said smoothly, lifting his glass. Shall we toast to the future? The group chuckled and raised their glasses, but the energy in the room had shifted. Sarah hadn't just shown up. She had disrupted the narrative. And Marcus hated losing control. The media swarm. Sarah barely had time to breathe before the media descended. Miss Chun, what are your thoughts on the wedding? How does it feel to see your ex-husband move on? What do you think about the pregnancy announcement? Who are these children with you? She held up a hand. One question at a time. Please. A young reporter, her face barely concealing excitement, stepped forward. "Miss Chun, it's well known that Marcus Jiang ended your marriage due to issues with heirs. But tonight, you arrived with 4 children. Can you clarify the nature of your family?" Sarah smiled, looking directly at the cameras. "Of course. These are my children, Michael, Lucas, Emma, and Sophie. They may not share my blood, but they share my heart. Family isn't about genetics. It's about love and choice, and I wouldn't change mine for anything." The crowd murmured in approval. "Does that mean you've moved on?" another reporter asked, microphone extended. Sarah met the reporter's gaze with a knowing smile. "Let me ask you this," she said. "Why do we assume a woman's success is defined by her relationship with a man? Why do we act as if I am the one who needs to move on when, in reality, I've already built something extraordinary?" Silence. Then, applause. From across the room, Marcus watched, his grip tightening on his champagne glass. This was not how it was supposed to go. An unexpected offer. Sarah stepped away from the media, feeling the weight of their attention still lingering. "You handled that brilliantly," a voice said from her right. She turned to see Mr. Leong again, this time watching her with open interest. "You remind me of myself when I was younger," he mused, sipping his whiskey. Sarah tilted her head. "Is that a compliment?" "A warning," he replied. She arched an eyebrow. "What are you warning me about?" Mr. Leong smirked. "You've humiliated Marcus, whether you meant to or not. He doesn't forgive things like that." Sarah crossed her arms. "I didn't come here for revenge. I came here to remind him, and everyone else, that I was never just an accessory to his empire." "And yet," Mr. Leong said, his gaze sharp, "you may have started something you can't control." Sarah studied him. He wasn't just a businessman. He was a strategist, and he was watching her like a chess piece he wanted to move. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. Mr. Leong leaned in slightly. "Because Marcus is losing his grip, his company, his alliances, even his marriage. Tonight, you've put cracks in all of them. If you wanted to, you could destroy him completely." Sarah held his gaze. "And why would you want that?" A slow smile spread across his face. "Because I don't believe Marcus deserves to hold the power he does. And I think, given the right opportunity, you could take it from him." Sarah stiffened. Mr. Leong chuckled. "Something to think about." With that, he turned and disappeared into the crowd. Sarah exhaled slowly. Marcus wasn't just losing in his personal life. His business was crumbling. And now, powerful people were noticing. She had come here to prove a point. But now, she realized, she might have walked into something much bigger. The storm breaks. Sarah returned to the main hall, scanning the crowd for her children. She found them in a corner, chatting animatedly with a small group of guests. Michael caught her eye and mouthed, "We're fine." She smiled. Then, a familiar figure blocked her path. "Marcus, enjoying yourself?" he asked, his voice dangerously smooth. Sarah didn't flinch. "Actually, I am." Marcus took a slow sip of his drink. "You came here thinking you'd make a statement." She tilted her head, and he smirked. "Sarah, the world doesn't care about your little rebellion. People don't respect sentimentality. They respect power. And power is what I have." Sarah stepped closer, lowering her voice just enough so only he could hear. "If you really believed that," she said, "you wouldn't be standing here trying so hard to convince me." Marcus's smirk faltered. "Got you again." Sarah smiled sweetly and patted his arm. "Enjoy your evening, Marcus." And with that, she walked away. A new game begins. Sarah gathered her children, sensing the night had run its course. "Time to go?" Michael asked. "Yes," she said, guiding them toward the exit. "We've made our point." As they stepped outside, the cool night air wrapped around them. The media was still stationed nearby, whispering, snapping photos, documenting every second. But Sarah didn't care. Because she had won. Not just the fight. The war. And Marcus. He had no idea how much worse it was going to get. Because Sarah Chun wasn't just here to prove she had moved on. She was about to rewrite the entire narrative. The empire crumbles. The aftermath of the wedding. The morning after the wedding, Sarah sat on her balcony, sipping coffee as the city skyline stretched before her. The sun had barely risen, casting a soft golden glow over the rooftops, but Sarah had been awake for hours. Her phone was already buzzing nonstop. The wedding had been a PR disaster for Marcus. The headlines were brutal. Marcus Zhang's perfect wedding overshadowed by former wife's stunning comeback. Ex-wife Sarah Chun steals the spotlight, proves success beyond the Zhang empire. Marcus Zhang's carefully curated image faces its greatest threat yet. The truth. Sarah scrolled through the articles, smirking at the photos. There she was, standing confidently in her crimson cheongsam, her children beside her like an unshakable force. The cameras had captured everything. The warmth in her interactions, the ease in which she navigated the room, the contrast between her genuine confidence and Marcus's forced bravado. Most damning of all, Victoria's uncertain smile in every photo beside Marcus. Sarah exhaled, setting her phone down. Marcus had orchestrated a spectacle to humiliate her. Instead, he had humiliated himself. Mom. She turned to see Michael stepping onto the balcony, his laptop tucked under his arm. "Morning, sweetheart," she said, gesturing for him to sit. "You're up early." Michael grinned. "So are you." He opened his laptop, scrolling quickly before turning the screen to her. "You might want to see this." Sarah leaned in. A financial news report was playing. Zhang Industries has seen an unexpected drop in stock prices following last night's wedding event, with analysts speculating on recent controversies surrounding CEO Marcus Zhang. Investors are questioning the company's stability as rumors swirl regarding internal power struggles. Sarah arched an eyebrow. "Well, that was fast." Michael smirked. "Social media's been tearing him apart all night. People are starting to question if Marcus is as invincible as he pretends to be." Sarah sat back, thinking. This was bigger than she had expected. She had gone to the wedding simply to prove a point. But the ripple effect, that was something entirely different. And if Marcus was in trouble, that meant someone else was circling. Mr. Leong, the enemy of my enemy. By noon, Sarah received the call she had been expecting. "Miss Chun," Mr. Leong's voice carried its usual confidence. "I believe we have much to discuss." Sarah smiled. "Do we?" "Oh, don't play coy," he chuckled. "You saw the numbers this morning. Marcus is bleeding, and I suspect you'd like to see just how deep the wound goes." Sarah twirled her pen between her fingers. "And you want my help?" "I want to offer you an opportunity," Mr. Leong corrected. "Marcus underestimated you. He always has. But you and I, we see the game for what it really is." "And what game is that?" Mr. Leong's voice turned sharp. "Control. Power. Legacy." Sarah exhaled, leaning back in her chair. Once, she would have recoiled at the idea of power plays. Now, she saw them for what they were, a way to protect what she had built. "I'm listening," she said. Marcus's world begins to crack. While Sarah was meeting with Mr. Leong, Marcus was doing damage control. His office was in chaos. His PR team had been fielding calls all morning, investors demanding answers, reporters speculating about the stock drop, and worst of all, Victoria's father wasn't pleased. Victoria sat across from him, arms crossed, watching him with something close to amusement. "You really thought she'd show up and cry in a corner, didn't you?" Marcus clenched his jaw. Sarah's always been good at playing the victim. Victoria scoffed. "She wasn't the victim last night. You were." Marcus shot her a glare, but Victoria was unfazed. "My father's reconsidering the merger," she continued. "He thinks you're losing control. And he doesn't like instability." Marcus stood abruptly. I have control of everything. Jang Industries is fine. Victoria tilted her head. Is it? Marcus felt the power slipping through his fingers. Sarah had done this, and he would not let her win. A deal with the devil. That evening, Sarah met Mr. Leong at a high-rise restaurant, the city glowing beneath them. Before we begin, Mr. Leong said, swirling his wine glass, let me ask, how far are you willing to go? Sarah leaned forward, resting her chin on her clasped hands. What do you have in mind? Mr. Leong smirked. Marcus's empire is built on illusion, but I know for a fact that illusion is cracking. He slid a file across the table. Sarah opened it. Inside were confidential documents, inconsistencies in Jang Industries' financial reports, potential insider trading accusations, legal loopholes he had exploited. This, Mr. Leong said, tapping the file, is what takes him down. Sarah studied the pages, her heartbeat steady. This was it, the perfect chance to finish what Marcus had started when he tried to destroy her. But something didn't sit right. She wasn't Marcus. She didn't take people down just because she could. She only fought battles that mattered. Why are you giving me this? She asked. Mr. Leong smiled, slow and deliberate. Because I want Marcus out. He's a liability. And you're an asset. A rising power. Someone I'd rather work with than against. Sarah exhaled. She had a choice. She could bury Marcus, or she could let him bury himself. She closed the file. If he's already unraveling, I don't need to be the one to cut the final thread. Mr. Leong studied her for a moment. Then he nodded. Interesting, he mused. You're playing the long game. Sarah smiled. Always. Marcus's last move. Just as Sarah returned home that night, her phone buzzed. Marcus. For a long moment, she debated answering. Then she did. Marcus, she said smoothly. You think you've won. His voice was low, almost desperate. Sarah leaned against her desk. Haven't I? He exhaled sharply. You don't understand. The world isn't kind to people like you. You think these people are on your side. The moment you stop being useful, they'll turn on you. Sarah smiled. That's where you're wrong. My power doesn't come from fear, Marcus. It comes from respect. Silence. Then, stay out of my way, Sarah. Sarah chuckled. I already told you, Marcus. I moved on. You're the one still chasing shadows. Click. The line went dead. Sarah set the phone down, shaking her head. Marcus was desperate, and desperate men made mistakes. She had nothing to fear. Because for the first time, Marcus Jang was the one running. And Sarah was leading the future. The final reckoning, the beginning of the end. Marcus Jang was unraveling. Sarah saw it in the headlines. Jang Industries faces internal disputes amid controversy. Stockholders question Marcus Jang's leadership after PR disaster. Sarah Chun's comeback more than just personal. It's business. She saw it in the way his carefully curated image was beginning to fracture. For years, Marcus had controlled the narrative. Now, for the first time, he wasn't the one holding the pen. Sarah sat in her office, watching her children at the kitchen table through the glass doors. Michael was explaining something to Lucas about stocks and investments, while Emma tried to balance a spoon on her nose. Sophie giggled, clutching Mr. Snuggles. This was her world, and she wouldn't let Marcus touch it. Her phone buzzed. Lillian, her PR strategist. You're trending again, Lillian said without preamble. Sarah smirked. Should I be worried? Not at all. People love you. They love your story. And more importantly, they love that you didn't need Marcus to win. Sarah exhaled. That was the truth, wasn't it? She hadn't won against Marcus. She had simply walked beyond him. But Marcus wasn't the type to accept defeat, and she knew the final move was coming. Marcus's desperation. The next morning, Sarah received an invitation. From Marcus. She stared at the elegant white envelope, her name embossed in gold lettering. Inside, a note in Marcus's familiar, sharp handwriting. Dinner. My office. We need to talk. Sarah sighed. Jenny, her assistant, peered over her shoulder. You're not actually going, are you? Sarah closed the envelope. Oh, I'm going. Jenny groaned. Do I need to schedule a crisis team in advance? Sarah smiled. Not yet. Let's see what Marcus has left in his arsenal. The final meeting. Marcus's office was as ostentatious as ever. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a massive mahogany desk, and the same cold, calculated atmosphere he had always cultivated. But something was different. For the first time, Marcus didn't look like a man in control. He looked like a man grasping at straws. Sarah took a seat across from him, crossing her legs. So, you called me here. What do you want, Marcus? Marcus leaned back, trying to reclaim his usual arrogance. We need to stop this war between us. Sarah blinked. War? Marcus, I've barely lifted a finger. His jaw tightened. You don't understand. My company is under scrutiny. My stockholders are questioning my leadership. The merger with the Leongs is at risk. Not my problem, Sarah said smoothly. Marcus exhaled sharply. Sarah, this is bigger than us. She tilted her head. You didn't care about bigger than us when you threw me away like an inconvenient business decision. Marcus clenched his fists. You have influence now. You could help fix this. Sarah let out a soft laugh. And why would I? Because, Marcus leaned forward, his voice low. If I go down, you go down too. Sarah arched an eyebrow. How exactly? Marcus smirked. I still have the connections, the power. I could make life very difficult for you. Sarah just smiled. You don't scare me anymore, Marcus. He flinched. Sarah stood. You know what your problem is. You always think power is about control. But real power, it's about legacy. And yours, she gestured around his office, is built on sand. Marcus's mask cracked. You're making a mistake, Sarah. She leaned down, voice soft but firm. No, Marcus, you did, when you thought I would always be beneath you. Then she turned and walked away. And Marcus, for the first time in his life, he had no move left to make. The empire falls. 1 week later, the headlines confirmed what Sarah had already seen coming. Jiang Industries stock plummets after boardroom fallout. Insider scandal exposed. Marcus Jiang under investigation. Former business titan faces possible resignation. Sarah sat in her office, watching the news roll in. Jenny entered, holding up a tablet. Did you see the latest? Sarah took it, scanning the screen. The board was voting to remove Marcus. She set the tablet down. It was over. Not because she had destroyed him, but because Marcus had built his empire on a lie. And lies always crumble. A new beginning. That night, Sarah stood on her balcony, watching the city lights flicker. Michael joined her, hands in his pockets. So, that's it. Sarah smiled. That's it. Lucas appeared next. Does this mean Marcus lost? She considered the question. Marcus had lost his empire, his reputation, his power. But had he learned anything? That's up to him, she said. Emma leaned on the railing. And us. What's next? Sarah turned to her children, her greatest success, and felt an overwhelming sense of peace. Whatever we want, she said. Sophie, holding Mr. Snuggles, grinned. Ice cream. Sarah laughed. Yes, Sophie. Ice cream. As they all crowded together, laughing, planning their next adventure, Sarah felt it. The freedom. Not from Marcus, but from the past. And that was the real victory.